Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I just got to ask you, because it wouldn't be right not to, about I think one of the best reporting stunts I've ever read about. That in 2004 you found this guy on the Kerry campaign who had actually produced that eggs getting smashed
Oh
commercial,
yeah.
and you dressed up as a Viking and you dropped some acid and you went to interview him. How did you come up with that? That is just sort of very inspired.
Yeah.
And what was that conversation like with the guy? Did he catch on at all?
Well, I mean, I got to back up and just have a
Go
little bit of
ahead.
a backstory too, because I had been on. This is the first story I ever wrote for Rolling Stone, and I was under a lot of pressure. I didn't know, I didn't have any story, and I had been on the campaign. I had been on the Kerry plane for like 3.5, 4 weeks, and I didn't have anything interesting to write about. I felt like the atmosphere was so antiseptic that I was really not getting good material. And so I was getting increasingly stressed out, and one of the things that I noticed was that they were feeding us 8 and 9 times a day, and I think they were doing it to keep the candidates to keep the reporters complacent. Also, to me, I saw the whole food thing as like a metaphor for the way campaign journalism worked, because these guys just sit around and they wait for the campaign staffers to hand them press releases, and then they just they send those press releases and quotes out into the world and through their reports. So basically, they're being fed all the material they get. So I saw this, and I decided that I was going to reject the entire logic of the campaign and stop eating and refuse all the food they were giving me. So I went on a hunger strike and stopped eating. And so after 3 or 4, I guess it was actually 4 or 5 days, I started to get really loopy in the head, and I developed all these very paranoid and irrational ideas. And when I met that guy from the ONDCP, the guy who had helped do the fried egg commercial, I got this idea that it would be really funny to drop acid and dress in a Viking costume and interview him about the whole thing, and put that interview out in the article. And it made a lot of sense to me at the time. It didn't make a whole lot of sense afterwards, I don't think. But I did that, and I was definitely very high on acid when I talked to the guy, and he knew there was something very strange going on, because I was in a Viking costume wearing wraparound sunglasses and not making a whole lot of sense and sweating and all that. But he was a good sport about it, I have to say. He went through the entire interview, but it was definitely one of the weirder afternoons I've had on the trail, that's for sure.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Anyway, and also, on the flip side of that, you pulled this pretty interesting. I guess you can't really call it a prank, but you went to go work as a foot soldier in Florida, I think in Orlando, right?
Right. Yeah.
And how was that? I mean, was it really hard to maintain the character for several weeks? Especially as you went on, I would imagine it would have been pretty hard to keep in character all the time.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I thought I was just going to be like like a volunteer helper. I was going to just be, like you said, like a foot soldier in the whole thing. But when I got there was such a vacuum of leadership in the campaign down there in Orlando that I ended up getting put in charge of 30 or 40 volunteers, and I was actually doing real work and organizing and doing all this stuff. So it was a pretty heavy workload, and it was a hard acting job for me, just because obviously there were a lot of conversations of a sort that I didn't have very often. But I found that if you just made a point of bashing certain liberal villains regularly, like once an hour or so, that that the suspicion definitely abated. I would tell all these stories about my cover was that I was a New York City school teacher on vacation in Florida, so I would tell them stories about how my liberal colleagues up in New York used to snort cocaine off my Bible and stuff like that, and and people as long as you're picking on Sean Penn and Hillary Clinton and all that stuff, you're bona fide as far as they're concerned. So I think there were some raised eyebrows about some of my behavior, but I think I got away with it for the most part.
All right, and without revealing too much, I gotta ask you if you have any good stunts planned for this season.
Well, I have another undercover thing of that sort that I did last year that's coming out in the book in the spring. So it was actually far more prolonged than that. It was about a 4.5-month deal in Texas in a church down there, which is pretty funny. So when that comes out, I think that'll be pretty amusing. But I'll let you know when that book comes out.
All right, yeah. Sounds great. And one last question, and I think it comes based on some stuff I was reading in Spanking the Donkey, but I think it applies pretty much to this cycle as well. You described how the media seemed to be fixated on this idea that the country's divided bitterly between red and blue or whatever, but you were pointing out that pretty much most of the country is uninterested in the process.
Right.
Why do you think the media? I mean, that in itself is an interesting story, and it is a type of conflict that could be covered in the sort of black and white, red and blue style that they do. Why do you think they haven't picked up on it? And does it just not play well into the narrative that is designed for these campaigns? It makes them seem unimportant.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't work according to the. I mean, the media has a narrative about the election and about the campaign season that has to be followed, and putting having this constant reference to the fact that less than half the country votes and that the system is horribly broken, and that there's all this ambiguity and distrust and hatred of the process, that would screw it up. I mean, the TV, its treatment of politics, it has to sell it as sports. It has to sell it as this exciting clash of ideas. And that's why they have the crossfire format where there's one guy on one side and one guy on the other side. I mean, crossfire wouldn't work if there was a third guy in the middle saying "Who cares" all the time. Right. I mean, it would lose that sort of gladiatorial combat aspect to it that makes it that makes their storyline so consistent and so intriguing. So I think there's a tendency in the media to shy away from any controversial or depressing underlying storyline about American politics, and then so they always try to portray the entire thing as sort of this vigorous, healthy exercise of democracy, and of course it isn't that always. So, but I think that's the reason why it's ignored. All
right. Well, Matt Taibbi, thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Sebastian. Talk to you
right.
soon. Take care.